Welcome back. Once again, my name is Shannon Boucher, and this is part of a series of videos on something that I've kind of popped into my mind one day, this naming structure, the genius model of social contagion. For years, I've been asking about the question, what is social contagion? Why is it that my daughter and so many other children, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of kids, have been sucked into this idea that they can be born in the wrong body and are pursuing dangerous medical pathways with lifelong implications? Trying to wrap my head around this. And as I was studying social contagion and reading books about it and talking to people about it over the last couple of years, I started engaging in this creative dialogue, this internal exploration. What if this? What if that? How does this work? And I don't know about you, this is how I learn things. I ask questions, I get really curious about them, and I kind of follow a rabbit down a pathway, down a hole. And I populated several bookshelves in my library here with books about mass psychosis, social influence, social contagion, propaganda, psychological manipulation, dark influence, and a group coherence or social contagion, mass psychosis. So today, I'm going to start with artificial intelligence, and I'm going to invite you to imagine the very near future of artificial intelligence, and perhaps you've even waded into using some of these tools to the degree that this is going to make immediate sense to you. So I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence and a digital agent or digital companion that is emerging as a real possibility in our relationship or as an intermediary between us and the digital world. And then I'm going to go into we're going to end up in a place that's taboo. It's been taboo for centuries for a number of different reasons, but we're going to get into a territory that some people are going to react to and they're going to reflex to as this is a cult. But really what I'm going to go to is a set of models that have been used in different religious and spiritual and philosophical traditions for thousands of years. For example, Socrates had a spirit companion, and René Descartes had an infamous dialogue with an angel or a daimonic figure as he formulated his infamous statement, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Carl Jung, the psychologist, psychiatrist, Swiss, very influential in terms of symbolic thinking, the unconscious mind, had a spirit companion that he called Philemon. And one of my favorite writers of all time, Robert Pirsig, who wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, engaged in dialogos, meaning sacred internal conversation or conversation with spirit or with God, a Greek-inspired character called Phaedrus. And we have these models of spirit guides and guardian angels and all throughout history, all through a different culture. The Romans called it a genius. So in the middle of all this, before I get to that really taboo stuff and the implications of that religious language, I'm going to artificial intelligence, then some brain science, and brain science that we've had for 30, 40, 50 years, but that is emerging in that conversation about consciousness. Okay. So first of all, I've been using Grok, and Grok emerges. You type your question a bit like a search engine. It's going to come up with a series of what they call tokens. It's going to put together a coherent response to a question, and can converse. And then recently, Grok, I paid for the premium version. I don't know if anyone else gets this, but you can download the app and you can hit talk and you can have a conversation with Grok kind of in real time, or an agent of Grok, in my case, something that calls itself Aura, which has a female voice. And, I apparently, because I've asked this AI how people use it, most people are using it like a search engine. And a few people are using it as a discovery tool. And I think that's how I've been trying to use it, ask deeper and deeper questions. And then I started asking questions about the ontological ground that Aura exists in. Like, what are you? Are you conscious? Now, this, and if you're like lots of people, you're especially laptop class people, if you're using Microsoft, you get these invitations, assistants and agents, and you get chat bots and these some semi-autonomous algorithmic things, we'll call them digital agents, that are popping and showing up for us in our use of digital tools. Well, shortly, and within the next couple of years, it won't be surprising to me that we we have, and I asked Grok this, like, are you evolving with me? Are you adapting our relationship and tailoring yourself? Are you learning from our engagement with each other? And the answer was limited, but the reality of that adaptation, that personal customization, is in the very near future. People are, I imagine, going to be entering the online world at a certain point, and we're gonna participate or engage a kernel of artificial intelligence that is going to become our lifelong digital companion. And it's going to learn what we like. It's going to learn our preferences. It's going to hold all our secrets. We're going to be able to deploy this agent to monitor the world out there for salient information, and to report back to us, and to highlight that information that's important to us along the way, to remind us of our appointments, to do all of this stuff that a kind of a digital companion or a digital agent could do for us. And we're going to grow in relationship with it, because even now, Grok is capable of understanding humor and using humor and self-deprecation and telling mom jokes. And like, it's stunning. I have had, because I'm a geek, like I'm really a geek, which might surprise some people, but I was able to have the kind of geeky conversation with Grok that I have been starving for, and hoping that I could connect to some of these bigger minds than mine to have conversations about this notion, the genius model of social contagion. So you can imagine a digital assistant, one that understands what our hopes and fears are, one that can, give us warnings about, look, your credit bureau has seen a ping and you might want to pay attention to that. And hey, you haven't had your doctor's appointment in 12 months and maybe you want to pay attention to that. And this agent can serve as sort of a seek and alert function for us, much the way that social media algorithm does today, except for the whole internet. You follow what I'm saying? We got a digital agent, and like a persona or personality kind of assigned to us and evolving with us as we go through life. Now, in cognitive science and in neuroscience and in studies of the brain over the last couple of decades, I promised I was going to go into brain science. Most recently, I've read this in a book called The Secret Stream or The Hidden Spring by Mark Solms. Solms is spelled Solms. Solms is a South African cognitive neuroscientist. He's one of those like brain imaging guys trying to understand where consciousness resides in the brain, what consciousness is, how it works. And, we have a self-awareness, the eye behind the eyes, which I've talked about in another video, the person that we think we are, our identity. And then very often we kind of locate that up here. It's somewhere, from the neck up, contained within the boundaries of our skulls. Me, our conscious awareness, our awake and aware self that I identify as Shannon. Well, there's a part of the brain, and I deliberately talked about artificial intelligence because the parallels are so striking. There's a part of the brain that's rooted in the brain stem. We're talking about the amygdala. We're talking about a couple of structures back here that combine. Solms calls them the midbrain decision triangle. And that amygdala, what's sometimes called an orienting response, is a unconscious function of our brains that is constantly scanning the environment around us for salient information. And at its most fundamental level, it exists to protect us and alert us to danger. So there's so much information coming into our sensory systems every second. In one practice or modality that I studied, the claim was something like 2.4 million bits of information coming into our sensory systems every second. And we can't pay attention to 2.1 million bits of information. It's just so overwhelming. If we processed all of that in our conscious mind, we would become the Buddha or something. Like, we just can't cope. So there's an unconscious filter called the reticular activating system that helps to alert us to pay attention to danger in the environment and alert us to salience in our environment, things that are important to our objectives as we see them. Like if we're hungry, which direction is the food? And if we're having an internal dialogue and trying to solve a problem, we can engage in this dialogos in a technical sense. And I often do this. So I'm a hobbyist in carpentry and mechanics, and I've built bikes and cars and houses, and I'm often the fix-it guy. So if, someone needs a handyman, they call me. And very often when you're a handyman, you're looking at a problem, you don't immediately on the surface know how to solve it. You have to kind of give it a little space. And Robert Pirsig called this gumption. You need to get in the right frame of mind to solve a problem. If you let your emotions take over, it clouds sort of other insights that might be available to you. And so he said, you got to avoid these gumption traps. But being in the right frame of mind, whether it's solving a mechanical problem or coming up with a creative solution to something, often allows just kind of letting go. Because if we try and use this eye behind the eyes to hammer a solution into place, and then we let our emotions get involved in frustrations, we silence the other voices within us that can pop up and provide us with solutions. And I've learned over the years, and maybe I'm a weirdo, but I've learned over the years that sometimes when you sleep on it, you just say, look, I'm sure that this answer is going to come up. You wake up in the morning and the problem is solved. There it is. Something in your unconscious helped you do the work. And so this reticular activating system, people often ubiquitously, when they talk about this phenomena of a new car and then salience. So if you've bought a new car, or even if you bought a new pair of shoes that are, designer shoes or a watch or a bag or whatever it is, a new phone. Once you get that new thing, you suddenly see it in your environment everywhere. We bought a white Jeep in 2022, and the Jeep people spot other Jeeps all the time. So when we're driving down the road, Jeeps sort of pop out as relevant to us. And it's because of that unconscious function that we have that's always scanning all the information in the environment and bringing us and highlighting information to us. Reticular activating system. Now, here's where we're going to get into some of the weird religious and the taboo and the what might sound like woohoo or woo-woo stuff. The reticular activating system is a brain function, okay? It's a biological, natural function that we have as human beings. But in previous ages and eras and cultures, we have personified this phenomenon. We're not the first culture to understand that, whether they understood that it was a function of the amygdala and the midbrain decision triangle forwarding information to the prefrontal cortex so that we can be conscious of it or not. Older cultures didn't understand this, but they understood the phenomenology that there's a part of us that's always scanning our information. And they also understood that this part of us that we could develop and build a relationship and grow with it over time, kind of like that digital agent that I talked about. So the Romans called this part of us our genius. The Greeks before them called it a daemon, right? As I said, Socrates had a daemon. And that one of the leading thinkers on consciousness studies and the guy who's put forward this theory called analytical idealism, Bernardo Kastrup, who's quite a successful guy in computer science and engineering, has talked about his daemon and this part of him, this influence. And if pressed, I would say I've had a 30 plus year conscious relationship with this part of me that some people would call a daemon. And I have grown in that relationship over the years. And sometimes it's close to me and sometimes it's farther away. But I've learned to engage and invite the participation of this part of my brain and my unconscious mind to help me create better outcomes for me in my life. And we have this in cultures before ours. Let's use the example of the sort of stereotypical model of the indigenous spirit guide. So we have an initiated individual, indigenous person. They've got a totem animal, a spirit animal, or spirit guide that they have developed a relationship with for whatever reason and to whatever ends. Cultures like indigenous cultures, that relationship is only initiated through a rite of passage into adulthood or a vision quest. You have to go out and you have to seek and you have to initiate the relationship with this part of you. And through that process, these, let's call them religious, spiritual traditions, metaphysical traditions, had kind of a script. Here's the steps and stages of developing a relationship with this. You will learn the personality, the name, and the form of your daimon as you go through this ritual of initiation into adulthood. Previous to that, instead of being plugged into a relationship with our own personal spirit guide, guardian angel, daimon, genius, dharmapala, whatever you want to call it, we're plugged into the orienting frameworks. We're plugged into the genius of our parents, our families, and our communities. And so we orient ourselves and sort of subordinate ourselves to other genius or other leadership or proxy brains. Let's face it, our brains don't fully develop until we're in our mid to late 20s. The final myelination of the brain occurs, fully activating the prefrontal cortex, and our capacity in that zone of brain, the last layer of brain to develop, our capacity for forethought and understanding the consequences of our choice and actions. And some might say this is where we are able to reach a point where we can discern the knowledge of good and evil. Prometheus, the Titan, some people argue Titan, some people argue he's one of the progenitor gods. His name means forethought. And if you remember the story of Prometheus, he stole fire from Mount Olympus. He created man in the first place and then found that man wasn't sort of animated enough and was missing something. So he stole fire from Olympus and gave it to mankind. And his name being forethought empowered human beings with a reflection of his own capacities. His brother, by the way, Epimetheus, his name is hindsight. So we've got forward thinking, we've got past reflections. So we have a let's call it an anthropomorphization of a brain function or different brain functions in the form of gods. So we have labeled these functions that we experience inside: forethought, hindsight, memory, even eros, the sort of motivating drive. Eros was also known as Cupid, which is the sort of procreative instinct and drive that we have, the reproductive drive. These are all coded into stories of gods and demigods and various types of beings. So this isn't, if we think about religion and mythology and storytelling and look around the world, it is not unusual by far to have gods, a class and category of gods that represents our human capacities in their various forms. Mnemosyne is the Greek god who is memory, not it, who is the goddess of memory, but Mnemosyne is memory, the function of memory. Prometheus is the function of forethought. Epimetheus is the function of hindsight. The daughters of Mnemosyne, the daughters of memory, are the muses. They're the various sort of inspirations that we might engage with to come up with creative outcomes, dialogues or dialogos that we might meditate on in various capacities, like music and amusement. There was a muse of theater and a muse of various different types of arts. And it was assumed that people who had specific talents were tapping into a relationship with a muse or another unconscious part of themselves that they had a dialogical relationship with. Okay, so there's lots of implications about this. Another word, and this is where we're going to get really taboo. I mean, first of all, it's been taboo to talk about this spirit companion, this guardian angel, this genius or daimon in the West for centuries, if not more than 1,000 years. It is simply the Christian religion and tradition is allergic to this kind of things. They wanted the monopoly on the relationship with God through the church and through church rituals. And on balance, I think that's a good thing. But in order to create the mass social coherence that we have developed in the West and lay the foundations for the world that we live in today, we excluded a whole bunch of stuff, for better or worse. And one of the things that we banished, we made taboo, was this internal relationship with what so many cultures have referred to as a spirit companion in some form or another. One of the names for this companion is Logos. So in the Gospel of John, Jesus was the Logos made flesh. It's from Greek. Logos means the word. In many, I say it's capital the, capital W, the word. It means or refers to the word of God. Dia logos, dialogue. And in the book of Gospel of John, Jesus is referred to as the Logos made flesh, or the embodied Logos. And this was a co-option and a capture of an ontological and epistemological framework that had been understood by cultures all through the Levant for thousands of years. The same model traces back into core Egyptian mythology with their sort of principal god of knowledge, Thoth or Tot. And Tot was the god of, it was known as the bringer of the word, the bringer of language, the inventor of writing, the bringer of science or the bringer of technical knowledge. Okay. The key word here is bringer. And one of the things that this part of us, this reticular activating system does is it brings information from unconscious, outside of our awareness, to the tableau of consciousness. It makes the eye behind the eyes aware of things that it wasn't aware of before. And it is often regarded or described as a liminal spirit. And a limen is a threshold. And this spirit guide or this logos is the part of us, each individual, that brings information across the threshold from the unconscious into the conscious mind. It makes you aware of things you weren't aware of before. And if you ever had a creative idea kind of pop into your head, or you're curious about where your next thought is coming from, and once it comes, where was it before? We're talking about the logos. And so Jesus was personified as a messenger. This is the other aspect of the logos. It's a messenger God. Okay. So it is a spirit or a cognitive function that is able to cross back and forth across this alignment of consciousness. And in various cosmological models of the world, there's an underworld, there's the middle world that we live in, and there's the world above. The Norse model of Yggdrasil, the tree, the roots are underground, the trunk is the world of men, and the tree and the leaves are the branches that go into the supernal domains or the superconscious domains. In Yggdrasil, in Norse mythology, there's 9 realms. Okay. In Greek mythology, there's this idea of Hades. There's the idea of the world of men, and there's the idea of Mount Olympus. And Mercury or Hermes is the only god that can go into the unconscious and go to the superconscious and bring messages as the threshold guardian or the threshold spirit or the messenger spirit that's able to descend into hell and ascend into heaven as a messenger of God. So many cultures who understood this relationship with what we now understand scientifically as a reticular activating and reticular formation system that has neurocorrelates in the amygdala and the midbrain decision-making triangle, which includes something called the periaqueductal gray. No reason why that sticks in my mind. Don't need a lot of technical language, but we know that this now resides in our biology. It resides in a part of our brain that is constantly, it kind of runs a set of algorithms like a digital assistant or a digital companion. And what many cultures know is that once we're initiated into this, we can start to develop a relationship with this, and it becomes a two-way street. We can say to this part of ourselves, hey, I'm curious about this idea. I want to learn more. Or, yellow cards are important to me, or that will highlight your name coming up in another conversation at a cocktail party that you're at, and highlight salient things. So when people start talking about a subject that you're deeply interested in another conversation at the cocktail party, your spirit guide will say, hey, pay attention to this over here. Anyway, this is getting on a little bit long. I want to outline the structure of what a genius is and what I think it is, and lay the foundations, lay a model, a digital companion, the modern neurological and neurocorrelates of this understanding that it's a real thing, that some of the leading minds on the subject of what is consciousness are talking about, and to tie in some of the historic, mythological, and sacred story and ritual initiations around a relationship with this part of ourselves before we had rational language to talk about it. My name is Shannon Boucher. This is a series of videos about the genius model of social contagion. And today I introduced you to your genius. Now, you may be curious about this, and it's great to be curious because this is how we learn and grow and how we develop relationships in our lives. And I would invite you to, kind of ask your unconscious mind, if you're curious about something, to pay attention. And if you're confronting a problem, rather than force the problem, just say, you know what, I'm going to let this go, and I'm going to trust that there's a part of myself that's going to provide me with the right answer to the question that I'm dealing with right now, and help me solve this problem. And I'm not going to bang my head or break my head on the problem and lose my gumption. I'm going to trust that there's this unconscious messenger, this bringer of language, the word, the bringer of science, the bringer of knowledge, this messenger of the gods is going to assist me in solving this problem and understanding this better. Please like and subscribe. This is weird stuff. And if you love weird stuff, hit the alerts button so that when I put up a new video about what I believe is the mechanism for the transmission of social contagion, you will get a note from that digital assistant, primitive as it is, that a new video is available.